It's almost been 3 years since the official release of Legends of Runeterra, and I have been playing this game non-stop for almost that entire time. We've had some amazing metas, and we've had some absolutely horrible metas. And I was starting to think that I'd have to deal with Nami yelling, "Let the tides carry you!" and "Rise with the surf" for the rest of my existence. But a glimmer of hope showed up in the latest roadmap. To give full context, let's take a step back and look at the first part of the Darkin saga that would change Legends of Runeterra forever. First, we get a Runeterra exclusive champion with Nora, which means Silco is pretty much confirmed, right?
About time I got my hands dirty.
And a year after the release of Battle City, one of their region exclusive traits has become available for other regions as well. Dual region cards. Up until now, dual region meant Battle City plus X region, but now anything goes. Noxus Ionia, Demacia Freljord, you name it. The Darkin saga is going to be 3 expansions in total, so we have 3 Darkins as the faces of the expansion. We got this guy, or guys, over here who is only played because he gives access to some busted cultist cards. And then there's this guy who is played because, oh wait, he's not played at all. Surely next expansion, when we get the final Darkin, things will be better, huh? Anyway, the possibilities are endless when it comes to new cards and effects. So it's a fantastic time to be invested in not just Legends of Runeterra, but the world of Runeterra. There is, of course, a few things to be said about the meta, because we went from Shurima combo meta with Kai'Sa to an Ionia combo meta with Scout Lee Sin, which is something straight out of my worst nightmares. And not long after, we had a different flavor of combo with RNG elements and Ezreal nuking your Nexus at burst speed from 15 HP. Aside from the meta though, it's been nothing but good news. Frequent balance updates, the devs talking to the community, themed expansions starting with the Darkin saga, this leaked image of Lee Sin. The future is looking good for Runeterra. But hold on, before you put on your party hat, there are 2 issues we need to talk about. First, why the hell isn't Fiddlesticks in the game yet? And second, Legends of Runeterra officially announced rotation for 2023. And a lot of players, me included, are confused about what that might look like. Is your favorite champion getting removed from the game? Will they be playable in a different game mode? Will my cards stay in my collection, or are they being rotated to the void as the Secret 11 region? And, well, the truth is, I don't know. And that's why in this video I want to talk about why rotation is necessary, why I'm excited about it, and why I think overall it'll make Runeterra a better game. And yeah, even if a card like Victor, my favorite champion, ends up being rotated, I'd be sad, but ultimately I'd understand why it might be necessary. Here's the official roadmap that shows a peek at 2023. Starting off with fantastic news that we're getting more LOR exclusive champions. Obviously, this means Silco, Ledro, Citria, and who else? Gromp. Also, please help me understand why I've seen people get upset over this. Comments saying, "I hate Nora because she took the place of an actual league champion," are just so strange. Completely dismissing an awesome character with interesting design that's part of the lore and universe because you couldn't get your 20th Ionian champion like Akali? Oh yeah, if you ask me, keep champions like Nora coming. And for the final piece of news in the roadmap, of course, rotation. Rotating cards is pretty much inevitable for any card game if you don't want your game to devolve into an absolute wasteland full of broken combos and faster games. But okay, I'm already getting ahead of myself. What is rotation? A set rotation means that only cards which have been released within a specific period of time can be used. For example, in the case of Hearthstone, they can only use the cards that have been released in the past 2 years. Anything before that, you can't use in standard mode. They have a core set, which is basically the building blocks of the format, and new sets usually build upon that core set. All the cards released before those 2 years are still around and playable in the Wild format, where every card ever released is playable. I'm pretty sure Wild stands for Wild West, because that's honestly what it feels like when you enter a mode with thousands of cards from 8 years worth of expansions. I understand the frustration. When your favorite card gets rotated, it feels as if the card gets removed from the game. While that's not entirely true because of a Wild format, I also think rotation doesn't work for Runeterra in the same way it works for other card games. Can you imagine a champion just getting removed from ranked in League of Legends? Actually, wait, I might be onto something here. Rotating means that a part of the collection leaves so another part of the collection can see play. As cards get released, it means there's going to be some power creep and overlap to the point where it becomes completely useless to play one card over another. League of Legends tries to make their champions unique enough to not run into that problem, until they made ranged and melee versions of Samira. Let's go over some of the reasons why rotation works for card games and why it's so necessary. Number 1, and this is the most important one in my opinion, it allows designers to choose a different design direction for a region without being stuck with cards that are no longer part of their design philosophy. Occasional oversights and the obvious power creep are the main reasons why sets from years ago remain stuck on a completely different power level from the cards that are being printed currently. Compare Radiant Strike to Catch and Shapestone. Or for overall power level, compare a 2022 champion like Seraphine to a 2020 champion like Callista. Number 2, it allows the meta to stay fresh. A game where the same cards are always good becomes stale and predictable. Runeterra has been doing a very good job of putting different archetypes into the spotlight, but bad cards will forever remain bad as new powerful cards get released. Of course, there's always some amount of variety because counter decks can suddenly become playable to combat the top dogs of the meta. For example, in the meta where Kai'Sa was the best deck in the game, Thresh Nasus suddenly turned out to be a very strong counter. But instead they replaced Thresh with Kindred, and to my surprise, this deck actually turned out to be powerful beyond just being a Kai'Sa counter, and it still saw a lot of play even after the Kai'Sa nerfs. It's beautiful when this happens because if the deck didn't start seeing play as a specific counter, maybe it wouldn't exist at all. Most of the time though, these counter decks are finicky and don't impact the meta on a larger scale. If cards don't get rotated out of the game, Riot will continue power creeping existing cards and print cards that are stronger and stronger, which in essence means older sets get rotated anyway, because nobody plays Legion Drummer as their 2-drop when Ionian Hookmaster exists. By actively removing sets from a format, you allow the designers to release cards that would otherwise get overlooked, but can now be included in a deck because there's simply no alternative available. Every competitive aggro deck in the past year has been playing Legion Rearguard, Legion Saboteur, Noxian Fervor, and Decimate. If you remove some of these powerful tools, the deck will start looking at alternatives to remain competitive, which is possible because other decks have some of their tools removed as well. With no Noxian Fervor and Decimate, it's possible Nox's aggro starts looking at Overwhelm options, with Brothers Bond and Decisive Maneuver, cards that are easier to play around for the opponent, but also feel much more satisfying for the user when they resolve. Listen, when I play a game, I want to enjoy all of the game. When I play Hollow Knight, I look at the map and I know around every corner there's going to be something to collect or discover. When I look at my Runeterra collection at the end of 2022, I know around every corner there's a card I'll never want to put in my deck because it's outclassed, power crapped, or gets hard countered. There are a ton of cards and archetypes to discover, but when I finish crafting my delicate Barkeep printer and I queue into the same deck with the same 40 cards for the 20th time in a row, I feel like I got food poisoning after the first bite of my meal at a restaurant. But when your collection is smaller, you have to look at new synergies and cards that were previously bad, but are now suddenly playable because their counters and more powerful options are gone. And of course, lists will still get optimized and refined all the same. Players will always look for the most powerful decks, but if Flock was gone, maybe we'll see different versions of Noxus control. Why bother with Shatter when Noxus has that Flock? Why make an Udyr deck where you could play Akshan? Of course it matters what region a champion is in, but when their card packages start seeing more play than the actual champion it belongs to, it's time to look at the culprits that always find a way to use a card better than the champ it was intended for. Rotating some efficient and staple cards means that they have to really look at what options they have available and decide if their deck can afford to run a slightly less optimal card to do the job their deck is intending to do because the staple card is rotated. That's how a meta stays fresh instead of playing against Broadwing when you're against Demacia or Arachnoid Sentry for Noxus every single patch. And lastly, number 3. Some cards prevent other cards from ever existing. This is a little vague, but what this basically means is that as long as one card exists in the game, it means a card that would otherwise be harmless can't exist because it would be broken in combination with the card that is already in the game. An example for this is the Trundle Lysandra combo deck that was meta last year. This deck tried to level Lysandra to get the Watcher in hand as fast as possible, which could then be reduced to 0 mana with Trundle's Pillar and then summoned multiple times through Fading Memories and Spectral Matron. The nerf I was asking for during this time wasn't one a lot of people agreed with, because I didn't want Watcher, Lysandra, or the Ice Pillar to get nerfed. I wanted Spectral Matron to get nerfed. The ability to summon an ephemeral copy of a card in your hand has, up until this point, proven to be pretty harmless. But the fact of the matter is that we have no idea what cards have never seen the light of day because Matron simply exists. The fact that any 10 mana card can potentially be summoned at turn 8 is game warping, but most expensive cards in the game don't have powerful summon effects, so they can't be abused by the Matron. But what if Matron is the reason we don't have any powerful 10 mana cards in the game? Because, well, turn 8 is a lot sooner than turn 10 and Matron is the only way to potentially break expensive cards. If a card like Matron gets rotated, we open up a ton of possibilities to print amazing, game-ending bombs that just can't be cheated out a couple of turns early. I really like Demacia has been considered boring because all their decks do more or less the same thing. Summon units with good stats, play some strike spells, and attack. A lot. One reason we haven't seen a ton of exciting cards get released for Demacia is because rallying is just simply one of the most powerful things you can do in Runeterra. Every single unit that gets released needs to be designed carefully to make sure it's not too broken in a region that can attack multiple times every turn. So what if we rotate every rally card in Demacia and shuffle their balance around? The way to look at this is literally as follows. Rally existing in Demacia nerfs all other Demacia cards. Riot even admits this in the balance patch where they nerf rally cards and buff Lauren Duelist to bring back some power in other areas. Also, I wrote this script months before that patch happened, so that kinda goes to show that I actually do have the big smart. With the rally nerfs, Riot opens up the design space to print new interesting cards without falling back on just attack a lot to make a deck competitive or broken. And let me just make this clear again, this is all just speculation, make no mistake. We have absolutely no idea what could happen. Everyone has their own magic version of rotation in their head that will solve every issue they currently have with the game. So before I move on, fair warning, this video is mostly just talking about best practices, the way other card games approach rotation, and a whole lot of guessing. Keep that in mind before you prescribe me with a couple gallons of copium again. So, how will Legends of Runeterra approach rotation? We have a little bit of information that was posted in a dev blog recently. The plan is to add a second format to Runeterra called Eternal. Standard will have most cards playable, Eternal will have all cards playable. Once a year, cards will move in and out of both formats, while Standard will always have roughly the same amount of cards available. This is how rotation works in most games, but Runeterra will have to be careful with their approach because the selling point of our game is champions, and players get attached to their favorite champion cards and decks. Just like in League of Legends, players get attached to their main or a role. What happens when GrappLr loses Karma? What happens when MajinBae loses Ionia? What happens when I lose my printers? Complete chaos! It's also impossible to rotate sets from a specific year like Hearthstone does, because in Runeterra, entire years were dedicated to one single region. If we rotated all cards from 2020, we wouldn't have Buildsmart or Targon in a game. If we rotated 2021, we wouldn't have Battle City. Maybe not such a bad idea after all. The sad reality is we have 10 regions and we're not getting any new ones. So that's not an option. No Magic, Void, or Ishtal region. Instead, the obvious thing to do would be to take a few champions plus their card packages from every region and rotate them out. And this is exactly why I see a lot of frustration from players, because nobody wants their favorite champion to be unavailable in their standard game mode. I see the argument to buff or rework champions instead of rotating them, but this is basically like advocating for rotation. Some champions are beyond buffs. If you make Vladimir a 6/5, he's still going to only be playable in the exact same deck. So the only thing to do is rework Vladimir entirely. Another great example is Quinn. When you look at scouts, Quinn is a necessary part of the deck because of the go wide strategy, but she's entirely unplayable in any other deck. So you can buff Quinn to make her a little better, but buffing Quinn means you're only buffing scouts, which is already a pretty powerful deck most of the time. So by buffing Quinn, you'd have to nerf another aspect of the deck like Misfortune, and when that happens, you make every other Misfortune deck worse while they might be perfectly balanced. This is what happened when everybody's favorite Emperor, Azir, got nerfed because of Blade Dance. Every other Azir deck was perfectly fine but became near unplayable as a result. And this is why it's better to rotate a champion like Quinn, who is only good with Misfortune, and instead allow Riot to reimagine the champion. Because let's be honest, it was never about Quinn. It was always about that stupid bird. Even now, when she's somewhat playable outside of scouts, it's because there's a way to give that dumb bird the kind of stats and keywords that would make even Riven jealous. One of my favorite champions is Pyke, and while I love Lurk, I'll be completely honest, if Lurk had the exact same cards and playstyle, but their champions and cards instead were like Aurelia and Nami, I'd probably never touch the deck. This is why a Pyke reprint that's more general purpose, like Akshan or Draven, would be more than welcome to me. Rotate Lurk and allow Pyke to enter the game as a new card for a new archetype. This can be a little strange, I suppose, because in the internal format, that means you can play against a deck with 6 Pyke champion cards, but for people like me, that'd be a dream coming true. Games like Hearthstone have already done this with multiple cards for their League of Explorers, like Reno Jackson. The Eternal format is definitely going to have a rough time keeping all the cards balanced, but balancing Standard would be even harder because you have to think about every single card in the game. It's impossible for any card game that has been around for a while to have every card balanced and playable with a decent win rate. It just doesn't happen. Every deck has 40 cards with up to 3 copies each. Depending on how you built your deck, it's possible you're only actually using 14 unique cards. A smaller pool of cards means more cards see play. The more cards there are, the more cards will be obsolete. Balance doesn't matter in that regard. It's just a nature of card games to have a certain number of cards perform better than others. Rotation helps keep things fresh, even if there's a static pool of cards in the form of a core set. One of the coolest champions, Aurelion Sol, just doesn't see play anymore in a metagame this crowded. Rotation will provide a new environment for our arrogant space dragon to explore new champion and region combinations, because cards that are generally a lower power level can improve the deck synergy. Without Broadwing in opposing decks, your Herald of the Dragon has a bigger chance to succeed. And that's why champions will have to rotate too. New design space needs to be explored to keep the game fresh. New cards bring in excitement. Tweak cards are just like renovated homes. They look new and they get a new use, but they're still old. If champions stay the same, it makes it difficult to support unprecedented mechanics. A new take on a champion would represent a new side of them, like Pyke. Like I said, I love Pyke, but the Lurk archetype is just very narrow, and while Pyke is an awesome aspect of the deck, I'd like to see him reimagine and play around his gold sharing passive instead of his ult reset mechanic like in the current form. As long as the Eternal mode exists where all cards are legal, you don't really lose anything. Riot can rotate Yasuo right now and bring him back a year later when they release Yone because they have an awesome direction for the deck. There are a million ways to do rotation, and the details are what matters. We don't know anything, but it's still fun to think about it and theorycraft. So far, 3 champions have been announced for rotation. First up is Aurelia. And Blade Dance is gone. This is beautiful. This alone is reason enough to get excited about rotation. The best thing to do with Aurelia is to pair her with Azir, but the best thing to do with Azir is also to pair him with Aurelia. So for that reason, Aurelia is getting rotated so the designers can make space for players to explore different decks with Azir, without forcing every other deck out of the meta because of Blade Dance. Designers will also have more room to make cool Azir cards without being worried about those cards being too broken in a Blade Dance deck. And next up is Twisted Fate. And this one is a lot easier to explain because TF is a really good card with a mechanic that's fundamental to any card game: drawing cards. This prevents designers from ever creating new card draw champions and supporting cards because they'll just be better with Twisted Fate. So rotating the card boy means he won't have to get nerfed and lose what's iconic about Twisted Fate. And I only really have 2 problems with this. First, we're never going to see a Twisted Fate and Graves deck in Standard at the same time. And second, who's gonna tell Mogwai he needs a new intro?
Snap, we're back.
Oh, right. The Snap incident. And last on the list is Vladimir, a champion that doesn't work within their region and struggles to find a consistent deck. Vladimir needs a total rework, but it would be so far from how he currently works and his design doesn't fit with his region's strength. It would take a lot of time to find the right direction. So rather than keeping him in Standard, the devs can rotate him out to Eternal, give him some potential buffs or reworks, and plan for his return in 2.0 form. These are the champions Riot talks about as examples, and we can clearly see other cards that suffer from the same problem. Tahm Kench and Malphite are comparable to what Vladimir is going through. Akshan is comparable to Twisted Fate, and Quinn to Misfortune is what Aurelia is to Azir. A category not mentioned in the article is perhaps champion that benefit too much from the play-cast merge. Before this changed, Ezreal could only kill you once his spell resolves, but now he starts blasting as soon as the spells appear on the stack. Nami is another champion that benefits from this change and just generally got way too powerful with the amount of cheap spells and spells that replace themselves being printed. One important detail Runeterra has going for itself is how they don't force people to keep buying or grinding for packs. Games like Hearthstone and MTG force you to buy new cards to stay competitive with every new expansion. But Runeterra is too generous. I know I play far more than the average player, but at this point I'm pretty sure I'm sitting on a gold mine big enough to craft an entire year of expansions. On the other hand though, we have skins for champions, and not being able to play the cards you have skins for because they rotated is going to feel awful.
Star Guardian here.
We'll have more information in a couple of months, so all we can do right now is wait. The devil is in the details when it comes to this type of change, and while sometimes controversial, Riot has consistently made the game better with updates. So let me know what you think about rotation and what champions you don't want to see in the standard format any longer. In the end, all that really matters when it comes to rotation is that Lee Sin, Nami, and Ezreal get the hell out of here as soon as possible.